All right, starting on page 1 of the PDF handout for the training documentation, we're going to start on page 1 here, and we're going to talk now about the data structure. And so those of you that have been with Sage for a while, you already know that Sage stores the data in a company folder. So you have an overall folder that stores all the files that you process with the accounting software. Within that folder are a set of files. And the files that you're going to be focusing on for your report writing are the master files and the transaction files. So in your handout on page 1, it talks about the 3 different types of transaction files and the master files. So the transaction files themselves, this is where all the detail is stored. So we're looking at new, which is the unposted transactions, current, which are the posted, and history, which are the archived. Basically, you're able to report on any transactions that you have entered into Sage using any of those 3 files. And then your master file is where all the static information comes from. So things like vendor ID, vendor name, address, phone numbers, employee names, filing statuses, those types of things. Those are considered static information, as well as you're going to have fields in there for accumulated totals. So like job-to-date cost, job-to-date estimate, job-to-date dollars paid. That type of information will be in the master file. And sometimes it's just easier to pull master file accumulations than to try to sort through a bunch of transactions. So again, it depends on who is asking for the report, what kind of information they want to see on this report, whether you're going to pull this from the master or one of the transaction files. Now, inside those files, we have records. And this is another concept that you need to become familiar with. When you're looking at, let's say, a payroll master file, or actually let's use job cost as an example. You're looking at the job cost master file. Within that file, you have records for the job itself, for extras if you're using extras, for cost codes, and for categories. So you're going to have multiple records within that master file, and you need to determine when you're pulling the report together where the information, which one of those records that information is going to come from. Even though we say master, within that master, we may be talking about quite a few different record types that we're going to pull information from. Now, we have a concept here in Sage called data dictionary. So the data dictionary is your reference for everything that's going to be stored in each of those record types. So one of the things that I would recommend is that you go into the software when you start to design initially start designing your reports, is that you go into get into RD for us for a second. Under Tools, we have an option here called Available Fields. Now I've jumped to page 2. This is at the top of page 2 in your handout. This gives you a list here in alphabetical order by application. And then underneath that application name, you're going to see all of the different records that are stored within the accounts payable set of files. So when we're talking about like invoices, so these could be transactions, they could be just the specific record. You know, when you enter an invoice in AP, you enter an invoice record, then you enter a distribution record, and each of these 2 things has different fields available to them. So again, we're looking for, here's the vendor record, we're looking for the records that we think we're going to include in our job costs, or in our AP report. Or we're scrolling down, and actually you can type on your keyboard. I can get to the J's here. So here are the different records that we just talked about for job costs. There's the job, the extra, the cost code, the category. So again, you're trying to determine which of these records you need for your report. So if we're going to do let's say we're going to do this off the invoice record, we want to see it, and we might want to see what's on the vendor record. When you click on that record, it moves it over here to the record selected area. And then when you click OK, it brings up a print selection screen. If you're doing anything outside of Sage that's connecting with Sage, you want to go ahead and check this box to include the ODBC reporting so that you can see what the internal field names are. And then here I'm just going to do a print preview so that you can see what we're looking at here. Let me zoom in a bit on this. Okay. All right, so these are listed in, they're listed in order by what the screen looks like when you're inside the application. So as an example here, we're looking at the invoice record. So it's displaying first the vendor, the invoice, the description, the amount. These are things kind of in order by how it displays. And it'll be the same if I go down and look at the vendor record here. It's grouped by the screen inside Setup Vendor. So here's where we're seeing the vendor, the name, the address information, and that. So all of this is what you would see on that first screen. So in this first column, we're seeing the name. Then this internal name, this is for ODBC. So if you're interfacing with maybe with Crystal, these would be the names of the fields inside Crystal. Then you've got a field type. So this tells you whether it's alpha, whether it's numeric, whether it's a bullet. And then you've got a length. So this shows you how wide this field can be. Code, that's an internal thing. Replaceable, this is something you need to look at. Again, if you are interfacing with something outside of Sage, this lets you know if you're able to replace the values in these fields through ODBC. If there's no check mark or X here, you cannot replace that field with ODBC. And then down below here, we've got special values. So if you have a field that has predetermined values, they will be listed here. So like the vendor type. These are the different types that you can select when you're setting up a vendor. We need to talk about keys or indexes. At the end of each of these printouts, you're going to see an area called Standard Orders. Your report will always print by whatever is in Standard Order 1. So this tells me that if I run a report off the vendor master file, it's going to print in vendor ID order. There's a secondary key called name. And so I could, when I design my report, I could switch the order and have it print by name instead. So I don't have to design a custom sort. I can use this secondary key as part of my design. Now, if I come back up here and let's look at the invoice record, there's a few more fields here. All right, so the standard order for the invoice record is vendor invoice. There are some sub or secondary indexes that I can select from if I want to, and those are listed underneath. And in parentheses, underneath each line here, it's showing me what fields it's going to use to find that information. And that's really what a key or an index does. It's like an address to where this record exists inside the file, so that instead of having to sort through every single record in the file when you run the report, it looks at this index or this address and boom, it goes right to that record. Without these standard orders, these reports would would take forever to run and it would be worthless. Okay, so this is a huge important thing here to understand, that each one of these records has a standard order. Okay, so this is what we just talked about then, the key. So it gives the software an address to where this record resides. Okay. And we just talked about this as well. So the primary key, that's always number one, and then alternate keys are listed below if there are any, so that again you don't have to design a custom sort to get the report in a different order. If one of those alternate keys already exists, you should use it instead. And I'll show you when we get in the software where this comes into play.